Well, basically, I was talking to him on the side as well. As far as, okay, Nick and M. Demir, bear with us for just a second because we're experimenting with trying to incorporate videos into this. What we want to talk about is canning and food preservation and the basic steps. And so Bella has got 3 videos. I've got one, and Kathryn has a PDF and a little short one to start with. But when the video starts to play, the audio, we'll be able to hear the audio. But to watch the video, you're going to have to click on it yourself because we're not quite there yet. And remember, what we're doing with the YouTube side of things, that is still it's still in its infancy stages. So bear with us while we go through this. But today's goal is to start the basic concepts of how to can and preserve all the goodies that you just harvested. Does that sound good?
Yes, or that you bought at the farmer's market.
Right. Or that your neighbor gave you.
Yeah, or even things that you pick up in the grocery store. You know, fall time in the grocery stores in some areas, you'll sometimes have bulk items that they bring in that are relatively cheap too, and they're specifically they bring them in for canning purposes.
So Bella has dropped the 3 links, and Kaylin, we've got to have those for the YouTube recorded side of things. So he's got the links now. But we're going to start with Kathryn, because Kathryn has to go cook supper, and she has a little PDF, and then there's a short 3-minute video. I got the rhythm bot in here for that to play. You still know how to play that, Kathryn?
Not a clue. You're going to have to do it. But
Okay.
we'll start off with the PDF, and anyone that wants to open it up, I would, and I'll take a couple screenshots if I can as well too, just to show you. But I have to switch screens to back and forth to read this, okay?
Okay. And let me ask a question. M. Demir and Nick, how much experience do you have in canning?
For me, none. I've done it like maybe once or twice, but other than that, not really much.
M. Demir? Maybe she's cooking and just listening. All right. So
Maybe.
All right. You're on, Kathryn.
Okay, now there's just this is just a basic introduction to canning. There's a vast variety of things that you can preserve on canning, be it basic vegetables to making pickles. You can do like meats and fish and things like that. And you can do jams and jellies and chutneys and so on. So it's rather fun, but this is going to go through just the basics intro to canning. Pardon me, I have to lift my thumb to scroll my screen. Okay, so there's 3, and I'm going to just do a couple of screenshots here of this and drop them. Okay. No, canning is it's a step beyond cooking, and it's preserving. So it's a method that applies heat to food in a closed glass, like a glass home, a glass canning jar, and that you can store and keep in a cool, dark place. It seals the air out, and depending on what you're canning, they can last anywhere from a few months to actually to a couple of years. And it really depends on what they are and the quality of your seal, if it holds. There's 2 main methods. There's a water bath canning, and there's a pressure canning. Now, a pressure that's a little advanced, um, but you can do it. But it's simple basics. The types of foods you want to preserve will determine which method you use for safe and good tasting results. We'll walk through the three simple steps for a water bath canning, which is the best place to start for the beginners. And it's really as easy as boiling water as it sits here. And on the PDF, it gives you little things you can click on as well. Now I'm going to do another screenshot, so give me a second. And one of the I also have a link to a site, and it's connected to this actually that I'm reading from. And I'll give you the actual site itself. It has recipes on there and varying different things, but you can also order supplies on that site as well too. Okay, so for the water bath, your methods, these are great for like tomatoes, salsas, jams and jellies, fruits, sauces, chutneys. You can make pie filling or anything else that's, other high acid foods and that. So there's three basic things that will preserve your foods: vinegars, salts, acids, and those are your main things, and sugars. And they're natural preservatives when done in the right quantities, which makes canning rather fun and enjoyable because you get wonderful products out of it.
Acids like lemon juices.
Oh, absolutely. Like, lemon juices are good for acidity. Um, some tomatoes and different, say with a tomato, as an example, different varieties of tomatoes have different acid levels. Vinegar is an acidic product. Putting bits of lemon juice and things in that is adds acid. There's so many different ways that you can add acidity to a product, and certain things you don't want to add an acidity. Certain fruits have higher acidity, and not just your citric. I mean, there are different acid levels in other fruits, and that you know. So there's lots of things you can do. But this next little one I'm going to give you, it shows just your basic equipment that you'll need. So with this, I mean, and it talks about Ball. That's a product line, but a 21 quart water bath canner. They're fairly big, and they'll genuinely handle up to the taller, slimmer jars. And that a canning rack is a really good idea if because it keeps your jars separated when they're in the water, because you don't want your jars knocking together because they will crack. Do them in smaller batches. And then there's varying different types of jars. You want bands and lids. Um, if you happen to do garage sales or you have older neighbors that donate stuff to you because they no longer can, sometimes you'll have rubber rings instead. You just have to learn about how to use them. Most of your lids these days have the little bits of rubber right into the inside of the cap lid. But there's different ways of doing it. Um, so you want your saucepans, your measuring cups, your knives, your spoons. You want lots of dish rags because you need to make sure the top of your rims are pristinely clean and dry when you drop that lid on, like your cap and then your lid, or else you will not get a seal. Um, You want ladles and spatulas, and you do not want to use metal. Okay. And that's really important. So those are your basics. You can purchase canning kits and so on, if you're just getting started. So, and then what you want to do with all those products, your jars and your lids and your caps and all your utensils that you're using, you want to make sure that they are pristinely clean. A lot of the times, what I do is with my caps and my lids, I'll actually put them in like a big pot of boiling water, and I'll let them boil for about 5 minutes or so, because what it does is that extreme hot water will help clean them to make sure that there's nothing from your fingers or anything that are on there. So it just kills any sort of bacteria that's on them. Those are just my little tips on it. And then, of course, you want to keep your jars warm, because you want to be able to put your product into your jars already warm. You want the stuff you're putting into your jars warm, like any liquids, warm, um, at least warm, if not hot, because it helps with that process once you put them into your full canning pots and put your lids on and put your timers and so on. Um, you can also heat them in the dishwasher. I've, and that I've done that as well. I'll heat my jars in. I usually have two canning pots going, and I'll have my lids and my jars in one to keep them really nice and warm. And that's just something that I've always done. So let me take a PDF of this, or I'm sorry, a screenshot. If I'm not making any sense, please let me know.
Oh, you sound great.
Okay, so then once you have your basic stuff and you know what you want, and it's easy, it truly is to, in the age of the internet, to find varying different recipes, for different things, even just for basics. If you want to start out with just basic things, and that first, if you've never done it before, but there's almost nothing that you make that you can't can. Um, and so on. So I'll give you this next screenshot, and it's, basically you're going to select your recipes and do all your prep.
We lost Nick.
Oh, well. I'm sure he'll be back, or maybe not. So, I mean, your recipes, I mean, the girls are going to drop some varying videos. We'll share a bunch of recipes and that on here as well too. They're easy to find, and I've got a few pulled up later that I'll drop before I go to make my dinner. So there's hundreds and hundreds. There's canning books galore you can buy. The best place I've always found to get them, go to the library, or garage sales. I mean, especially older people, or if you're in a farm area and there's estate sales, things like that, go to them when they're farm ones, because you'd be astounded. I mean, the old cookbooks, the canning books, the recipes, um, varying different, things that you use for canning jars. I mean, when I first started, that's where I got all of mine, was actually at a farm estate auctions. It was a bonanza. Um, and then I taught myself how to do it. Of course, that was a lot of years ago.
Well, that's where I found my blue jars. Now, I don't use my blue jars for canning because the edges are not reliable to hold a seal, but they can be used for spices and dried goods.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was really hoping I could use the blue jars to can in, and then I read up on it. This was many years ago, and I went, well, there goes that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, another trick also as well, and I mean, and I've done it and it works, but you gotta be careful, like, when you buy, like, jarred, like, say, like, spaghetti or pickles or things like that, you can reuse those. They just don't you can't reseal those lids very often, like, repetitively over the years. You gotta be a little more cautious with them. I've done it. I've done it with, like, ragu spaghetti jars, I've used them. Another unique thing with these jars, and this is just a little side tip that has nothing to do with canning, and those of us that, especially with families, and you go through a lot of glasses. My daughter has never, I think she's only ever bought one small set of, like, glasses, like, for her kitchen, like, for regular drinking. She saves all her freaking jars. And and so she's got a whole cupboard full of varying different size glasses, and they're all jars. They make wonderful, wonderful glasses. It's just incredible. But, and she keeps the lids, and you put varying different dried stuff in, your spices, all kinds of stuff. That's just a little side tip that's fun.
I like the mincemeat jar because I like the decoration on the outside of those. They're pretty, and the lids seal real nice.
And this is it. I mean, and once if you've got certain things, say like, with chutneys or special spicy jams or jellies or, things like this that you like making, that you like want to give away for holiday gifts, you can buy much shorter ones even, or whatever, that they're decorative on the outside. Um, I know there's varying different things. I know the big one that you can get, and say like Canadian Tire or things. Canadian Tire always carries them, though of course you may not have those down in the States or wherever else in the world you are. But Bertrand makes is a wonderful brand name, and you can get them that they're plain, that they just look like, with your fancy little canned writing on them, or you can get them where they're very, very decorative glass. So they're kind of cool. So you have lots and lots of options. Okay, I'm gonna take another screenshot here, but I have to do it in two pieces. Sorry, I can't drop these and talk at the same time because my screen does funky things on me. And not to worry if on the screen these things are hard to read, because they'll show up small, because we're going to drop the link to this full PDF. You can either bookmark it on your computer, or you can actually download the PDF. And it's because this just covers the extreme basic, so it tells you a little bit of, prep of your jars, and in filling, and the, just little tiny tricks. You want to make sure that you have all air out. You need to leave a certain, depending on what it is, as to how much room from the top you want to leave enough for to heat so that they don't explode, but you don't want to leave so much air, because you almost defeat the purpose of canning if you have too much air in there. Awesome, Mike. Thank you. As I mentioned also as well, like, You want to have lots of clean, like really clean, fiber free, like that don't give off fibers. I find like if you can buy like J Claws by the roll, they're awesome when you're canning, because they're relatively cheap. But you want to make sure that your entire thread on your jars are pristinely dry and clean after you've filled them, and the very top flat rim must be dry and clean, or you will not get a seal. And there's no point going through all of this if you're not going to get a seal. Um, so because once that seal pops and it opens, you have to use your stuff right away or put it in your fridge. You can't leave it stored in a cupboard because it'll do like anything else. It'll just sit in there and rot on you, and you don't want to do that. So those are just little tricks. So, getting your air out is really important. Um, because if there's air bubbles in there, once it pops down, those air bubbles are going to move at some point and it will pop your seal. You just won't know when. So one of the things that I learned also as well years ago is, you know, going, once everything's canned and it's cooled and everything else, and you've put them down on your shelf in a nice cool, dark, not cold, but a cool, dark place, and that even if you do, say in your basement, if you got a cooler air area in your basement, you know, put a bunch of shelves on the wall, or, either individual shelves, or you can buy little shelving units. And then if they're open, just, put a curtain thing around it so it keeps it dark. 'Cause, but you want to go through once in a while through your cans and just very gently finger touch all of your caps, and make sure there's no movement in those caps. If you come across where one's got a tiny little bounce or give, pull it off the shelf, take it upstairs, wherever, check it, and you'll know how long that's been popped if you're, say, checking them on a weekly basis. If one week there's no give, but 2 or 3 days later you check it and there's a give in that, get it out of there and go use it. It's also the advantage of putting it in a cool place because it's not getting super warm. But it's something you have to do because you honestly, every once in a while, they'll just randomly, if there's a bubble or something that you didn't catch, even sometimes the smallest little bubbles is enough, that it'll pop your cap. So I always made it a habit. I just go down and just check them because it was fun. And once you get used to doing all this and you become like a semi-expert and really comfortable, you'll have a better idea in that as well. Okay? It's all a
Don't
learning
for,
process.
yes, and don't forget to label them and put the date on them.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I've done in that as well too, because like your caps can sometimes, depending on how you uncap and pop that when you go to use your product, your caps can be reusable. So I've never written on the top of my cap. What I've done is you get like painter's tape. Like if you're doing them as a gift for someone, you can just, with a special marker just right on the top of the cap and so on. But for my own personal use, I've gotten painter's tape because it doesn't leave an adhesive on the jar. And I'll just put a little strip on the side of the jar, and that's where I'll put my product name and the date that I canned it, so um and then that painter's tape is so easy to remove without making it all sticky like masking tape or something else does. Um but I've always labeled, or you can buy the labels if you're giving them away. You can buy labels for these things too that stick right on the jars.
And if you put the description on the top and you have a layer, you've got boxes, you can, well, you can see it better from the side than trying to look on the top.
Yeah,
I don't know if that made
absolutely.
sense at all, but I've learned that way too.
Yeah, no, I know. Now, the other thing and this, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, when it comes to canning, it's sort of like making crepes. And I know you're going, huh? Different.
Huh?
I know, right? Different altitudes will give you have different requirements. The higher your altitude that you are, the longer you must keep in your water bath. Crepes, believe it or not, have the same thing. And where the other thing that people don't realize is, well, I've tried making cream puffs and so on, and like they just don't work. That's because they're following a recipe. The higher depending on your altitude, will depend on little adjustments you have to do in that recipe and how well or how puffy your that they'll come out. And people don't realize it's kind of a fun little trick. And I'll put that on here as well. It is in this PDF, but the higher your altitude, the longer your process time.
And I can attest to that.
There, see, I have backup.
Want to comment on that last little shot there. On the right side there, it's got the little circle with the picture of the jar lifter and all. They come in kits, and the little kit that I bought a couple of years ago, I splurged, and I got the jar lifter. It came with a cheesecloth. It had a funnel in it. It had the air remover thinger out of it, and that little utensil. And then I went and I also bought the cheesecloth little rack. That made such a difference for me, that little rack, to strain when I'm doing my juices and everything. So it's worth the investment. And it was only like maybe $5 for the cheesecloth rack, and I think it was 10 for the other. And this will be my third year that I've used these. So I keep the original boxes, I put it all back, and I have a special spot that I keep just those items. They don't get mixed in with anything else.
Yeah, and yeah, that was one of the things that we have different things that you can is you can make juices and be it apple or whatever, and you can make it with pulp or not with pulp. If you've got oranges, you can can orange juice, apple juice, apple cider. You can make your own apple cider, spiced or not spiced, varying things. um Gold Star Mom has an incredible simple recipe for for grape juice, Concord grape juice, that is super, super healthy for you. And I know she'll share that.
I can grab
Um,
that.
exactly. Well, in that one, you don't need the cheesecloth. But if you're doing like, like an apple juice or something, because you want to, if you don't want it chunky, you want to use a cheesecloth. There's varying different things, and sometimes that comes down to a like preference.
Yes. And how fast you want it.
That too.
I've got that one opened up on the side, so let me know when you want me to drop that, okay?
Well, and then I'm gonna let you actually, because you can if you still have the couple of pictures that you had of your own grape juice when you did it, but would probably be awesome. But yeah, I'll let you do that. Now, the other thing also as well, and this is just something that I personally have made, if you ever can get your hands on a super awesome good recipe to make like your own Kahlua or Tia Maria, stuff like that, you can actually can it. I mean, I know it's got alcohol in it, it self preserves, but it still only has a certain shelf life once you crack that bottle. Um, and that, so when you're making your own, of course, you want to be able to seal it. And I know myself, I used to have an amazing, and I don't have it anymore, so I can't share it. I apologize. An amazing, amazing recipe that was given to me, oh, so many years ago, um, over 40 years ago, of making your own Kahlua. This stuff was awesome. You know, we used to actually have Kahlua making parties, but I would can them in the same way, and which is really nice because it keeps it long. It keeps that seal, much like you do, when you buy a bottle in the store, like you have to crack your seal. So I would can them and that in the same way. So you can actually make liqueurs and varying different things, and things with alcohol, and you can seal those as well too. You know, uh, just a little side tip because they're lots of fun. So that's the end of my basic PDF on your basic starts. If you have any questions or none of that made sense, ask away.
I thought it made good sense. And so the supplies that you need is a lot of these things you can find secondhand, but as far as jars go, how do you feel about buying secondhand jars?
You can, and I have. Now, one of the things with buying used jars is because you're boiling them a lot. I mean, your jars, even though the top edges, there's absolutely no chips, cracks, or anything, the more often those jars are boiled, it can compromise the jar after a while. And it's give and take as to how often that'll happen. But it does. But at the same time, I've bought new jars and done everything and done my entire canning process and go to take it out of the water bath, and all of a sudden the bottom of my jar will go split around the
Yep.
entire thing and drop out. So, I mean, it can happen to new ones. My best advice, if you're buying used jars, be it at garage sales, auctions, your neighbors, whatever, is check every single rim, every single one, including um where it screws down, like the sides, like, and run your finger and you check for even the tiniest chip. If, especially on that top, if there is a chip of any sort, even if it's teeny tiny, do not use that jar for canning that you want to store away and preserve. If you're making stuff, but you say you're, canning a jam or a jelly or a juice or something, um, and you want one in your fridge for now that you can grab or whatever. If it's a tiny enough just on the edge, it's not going to seal down, but you can use it for that. But do not expect to hold a seal on anything that has any form of a chip whatsoever. Um, and you want to also just run along the bottom of the jar and have a look to see whether or not there's any, and you want to get it up against a good light. And if you see any sign of even like a little hairline, or a little chip on the bottom or the edge, do not use that jar. Okay. Um, Most of the time with jars, you can do pretty good buying used ones. It's a matter of checking for those things and hairline cracks that haven't gone all the way through the glass yet, or chips of any kind. If it's got a chip, do not use it. Um, I would suggest, if you're buying used jars, always, always, always buy new caps and rings. Always. Don't use somebody else's used caps and rings, because you don't have any idea how long they've been used. And
How
especially,
many times do you reuse yours?
you know what? It really varied. It really honestly did. And I've been known with certain things that I've canned, and that where you bring them out of the bath. I've used, caps that I've had before, and that I've used 2 or 3 times, or whatever. And you take them out, and as they cool is when it's as those jars cool that your cap will, all of a sudden you'll hear a little pop and it'll suck down. And if you've got one that hasn't sucked down, put it aside. The next time you fill your canner to do your next round of jars, put that back in. If it doesn't do it the second time, replace the cap. Or if it doesn't do it the first time, if you want, toss that cap and use another one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of the things with the caps, which makes it, you can't say only use it this many times, or it won't seal after so many times, is you really have to look when you're reusing them. And this is where it's really important. When you go to use the product and you're trying to unbreak that seal, and a lot of people, and I'm just as guilty of it, would use a knife to try to get it to pop. If you've put a dent up and a gouge up in the edge of that to pop it off, chances are good you're not going to get that lid to seal again. Other than that, the best thing to check is to inspect the inside of that cap, and gently run your finger and that all around the entire thing. And you want to feel, what you're feeling for is any form of like a crack or a dent, because it's got a very thin layer of like a silicone rubber, or whatever it is that they use around the outer side, outer of that. And you want to feel for any sort of a dent or a crack, or things like that, because that will also prevent it from sealing. So it's just a matter of inspecting your equipment, and you learn to inspect it. So, and that. So those are my tips of the day for starting process.
Thank you very much for that. That'll help. Getting over that initial nervousness of, knowing what you need, that I think helps a lot. And the other part that I wanted to touch on again was also think about where you're going to store it and how you're going to store it, because you don't want to move them once you've put them there. You need to leave them until, of course, you want to go get them and eat them. But you're not, because from what I was looking at is you don't want to move them around because you don't want to break that seal.
Yeah, and I think you're going to go over your don'ts with canning.
Yes.
And that's probably
Yes.
the next thing to do. And then you guys can go over some basic recipes, how to do them, and so on and so forth.
Right. Okay, so Kathryn, you're gonna go make some chili, right?
Yeah, I was going to say Gold Star Mom and Bella are going to take over this, and I'm going to go start a pot of chili. And I will be back to listen as soon as I get the basics of it going, and then I can just leave it simmer. So I'll be back.
Wonderful.
Have fun, guys. Thank you.
Are you sitting in a rocking leather chair?
Who, me?
Yes, you.
It's a crappy old steno chair that I was turning, yes. Busted.
Thank you, Kathryn, for that. Hey, Bella, are you awake?
Yes, I'm awake. So, how do we want to do this? You want to just play the videos or you want me to give an intro?
If you'd like to do an intro, and then we can play the videos. And so we dropped the links up at the beginning. And I believe Kaylin's going to put the links down in the description, so you should be able to go and look at them on your own. But we are going to play the audio, and then we'll stop after the first one and address anything that might come to mind, and then we'll do the next one. And I believe Bella has a third, and then the last one I'm going to share will be the no, don't do this. So the floor is yours, Bella.
Okay, so I'll just do a little introduction that the first one is tips for water bath canning for dummies. So it's fair. I thought this was a really good intro video because it's only 3 minutes long. It gives a quick overview of sort of some of the basic steps. I thought it was really simple, easy to see what they're doing. Now, there's a couple things in here I noticed that I do a little differently, or I might say, somebody might say, well, you don't do that, but we can talk about that at the end. But pretty much I liked it because it gives you a lot of information quickly, without too much, you know, you know, it's just really simple and easy to follow, I thought. So here we go.
Are you going to play or am I? Because I can go play. I'm ready to go.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
I got it.
I've never used Rhythm Bot before, to be honest.
Water bath canning is the easiest method for preserving high-acid food, primarily fruit, tomatoes, and pickled vegetables. You need the following equipment: a water bath canner, a jar rack, a 5 to 6 quart pot and a saucepan, canning jars, 2-piece caps, lids, and screw bands, a jar lifter, a wide-mouth funnel, a ladle, and a non-metallic spatula. Look for these supplies at your local culinary store or search for canning supplies online. Assemble and wash all your equipment in hot, soapy water. Rinse off any soapy residue. Fill the kettle 1/2 to 2/3 full of water and begin heating the water. Put clean jars in this hot but not boiling water for at least 10 minutes until you're ready to fill them. Set the clean bands aside and put the lids in hot but not boiling water in a saucepan. Separating them from your jars protects the lid sealant. Next, prepare your food exactly as the recipe tells you. After preparing your food, pour it into the hot jars, leaving the right amount of space stated in your recipe. Release any air bubbles in the jars with a non-metallic spatula. To do this using the spatula, press back gently on the contents, going all the way around the jar. Add more food to the jar after releasing the bubbles, if necessary. No air bubbles and proper headspace ensure a proper seal. Wipe the jar rims with a clean, damp cloth. Put a hot lid onto each jar rim, sealant side touching the jar rim, and hand tighten the screw band. Hang your jar rack on the inside edge of your kettle, still filled with hot water, and place full jars in the rack. Make sure they're upright and not touching each other. Lower the rack into the kettle. Cover the tops of the submerged jars with 1 to 2 inches of hot water. You can add more water from a tea kettle or pan. Cover the kettle with the lid and bring the water to a boil. Let the jars boil for the recommended time. Remove the jars from the boiling water with a jar lifter. Place them on a clean kitchen towel away from drafts. Do not adjust the bands or check the seals. You should hear a ping when the jars seal. After about an hour, you can check the seal by pushing on the center of the lid. If the lid feels solid and doesn't push down, you have a good vacuum seal. If the lid pushes down in the center and pops, the jar isn't sealed. If that's the case, refrigerate and use them within 2 weeks or as stated in your recipe. If there's a good seal, no need to refrigerate. Label jars with the food and date you canned them. Finally, store your jars in a cool, dark place.
Okay, now the one thing at the very end of that video, it shows her putting both of her, stacking her jars on top of each other. And that is one of the things that the very final video will address, because I used to do the same thing, and that might be something to keep your eye out for.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, that's something that you probably shouldn't do. Yeah. So anyway, so that video really kind of shows, I think gives you a lot of information, some of the key things that you have to be careful about. So I thought that was a really good one. The only thing, there was something I was going to comment. One of the major mistakes people make when they're making jam, and especially men, because they tend to have a lot of strength, is they'll over tighten the lids and over screw the screw caps. And you really only need to finger tighten. So just when it gives you, as soon as it gives you resistance, that's enough. If you over tighten, you can have exploded, broken bottles. And so that's not good. So that's one of the big ones that I find it's very common. People will do that before they learn that you can't over tighten.
I did that. And then the other thing, the purpose of using the rack is to keep them separate, but also that you don't want your jars on the bottom of the pan. They cannot be sitting on the bottom of the pan. And you don't have to have one of those racks, but it really does make a difference.
Yeah, I saw that they put the lids together. You can put the screw caps together and create like some kind of separation between the bottom of the pan and the jars. But you know, those canning pots are so cheap, and you can often find them at garage sales or thrift stores. They're not very expensive, and you get the whole rack in there. And I just think it's simpler to have the rack, and then it's nice to have the rack you can pull out and adjust and lift up and all that when you're pulling the jars out. So I kind of
Absolutely. And inspect your rack from year to year, because mine broke and I caught it right before I started to can one day. But you can get replacement ones. And Kathryn was talking about where she can go. Well, I know that you can go grocery stores, Runnings, Tractor Supply stores. I hate sending people to Walmart, but they do carry canning supplies, and especially at certain times of year. And then I would always recommend too buying an extra set of jars, because when you give stuff away and you forget that you gave it away, next year you go and you have no jars. So think about that too when you're going to be giving stuff away.
Yeah, and I tend to reuse my jars. Depends what I'm doing. Like for canning, you don't want to reuse them as that many times. But I have a policy. I think you have the same one, where you give somebody something and then they bring you the jar back empty. And those jars, even if you can only use it a limited number of times for canning purposes, you can always use it for other things that you make that you just keep in the fridge. I do that. Like if I make applesauce and I don't can it, I just put it in the fridge to eat for a month. Those jars are great. And I just tell people, this isn't canned. You need to eat it right away. And usually it's so delicious, they don't care.
Right.
And I was going to say the other thing that the other suggestion I was going to make is grocery outlets. They have really good prices on this kind of canning stuff, especially certain times of years. Usually seasonally, you can find stuff, and it's super cheap. The other thing I was going to say, sometimes the hardware stores have really good canning supplies. In some of the hardware stores, like the Ace Hardwares, you can get a lot of these canning supplies and things like pectin. If you're not making your own pectin, that's where I found my pectin that I like, which is Bernardin low sugar pectin for jam. And that's one of the few places that still sells it. Walmart sells it. So if you're not making your own pectin, then that's what I recommend, because you can adjust your sugar on that one and still have nice results. And let's see, what was the other thing? I'm trying to think. Well, I lost my train of thought. So we'll just move on. I guess, do you want to move on to the next video, or?
Yep. And then one more comment about the pectin. There is liquid and there is powdered, and they don't set up the same. So make sure you're getting the correct kind of pectin. And then the other thing about the little boxes of pectin, there is a pull out, fold out chart for just about any item that you can think of that you're going to be preserving, and the different kinds of standard jellies and things. And so I keep mine just because I use it for reference from time to time. Anyway, every box comes with that instruction chart.
Yes, and I do that too. I keep one around even if I run out of pectin. I keep one hanging around because sometimes you can make jam with certain fruits. You don't even need to add pectin because it has so much pectin in the fruit, and you may need the instructions. So yes, it's good to keep those around. The other suggestion I'm going to make is that a lot of times you don't get the bubbling if you add a little butter to the jam. That's kind of an old recipe or an old tip that my grandma used to use, that basically it helps to avoid a lot of air and bubbling. The other thing is you need to sometimes skim off that bubbling, that you'll get all these bubbles on the top, and you need to skim that off.
Right. And what's your favorite tool to use to skim that off?
I just use I have a spoon that's kind of flat and wide, and it's kind of shallow. It's a wooden spoon actually. And I noticed that works pretty well. Sometimes you can find just silverware spoons that are kind of open and flat. Those work the best.
Excellent. All right. So we will play the next one.
Hi, I'm Jamie from an Oregon cottage, and I'm here to show you step by step how easy it is to can your own food. I did not grow up canning food, but I learned, and as long as you follow the directions and stick to recipes, it's super safe, and it's a perfect way to take care of the produce that you grow or get at farmers markets. So after you've figured out your produce and what you're going to make, and for this demonstration, I'm going to be making pickled beans. You can do any kind of jams, jellies. They're great first recipes for when you're just learning canning. So you want to get all of your equipment together first thing. And the thing I always like to start with is the jars. And you want to get canning jars that fit whatever size your recipe says, pint, half pint. And you want to wash them very well. And then you want to rinse them and then set them in the sink filled with the hottest water from your tap so they stay warm. The other major thing that you need is the canner or a large stock pot to hold your jars. They're very easy to find at thrift stores. They're very inexpensive, these enamelware canners. And you need a rack to fit inside, either one that comes up on the top or a type that just sits in the bottom. But you need something to lift the jars up off the bottom of the pot. Okay, there's a couple other things you need for canning. And I like to set all of these little things up next to my stove using a small tray. It really helps to contain the mess and protect your countertop. So a couple of the special canning items are a canning funnel, and these are bigger to fit over the jar than other normal funnels. Most canning funnels are plastic, but I really like metal because we're dealing with hot liquids here, and it's best to have metal for that. This is a jar lifter. It's made specifically for canning, and don't try to use tongs. I did, and I lost a jar. These are really secure, and they'll make sure that your hot jars get where you want them. You'll need rings and lids. You can reuse the rings every year, but lids have to be brand new each time that you use them. All you have to do now with lids is just to wash them with soapy water, and then they can sit waiting. It used to be you had to sit them in water and let them soak, but that's old. As a couple years ago, the USDA said you didn't need to do that anymore. So have those washed and ready. Okay, then you're going to need a couple of other just regular kitchen items. So a ladle, and you want to make sure to do metal if you have it, again, because we're dealing with hot things, and a spatula, and this time it has to be non-metallic. So this will be running around the edge of the jar, which you'll see, so they specify non-metallic for that. And you'll want either paper towel or rag that's moistened for wiping the lid. Get all your stuff ready first, and then you're set. Okay, when it's time to fill your jars, you've got all your equipment ready. For pickling, you're going to empty the water, and you're going to pack the jars one at a time, fill them one at a time. But if you're just doing a jam or a sauce, you just would empty your jars and start filling it. So you're going to put your canning funnel on top. You're going to go ahead and fill it with your liquid. And the one thing with canning is they talk about headspace, and you can only put your liquid to whatever the recipe specifies for headspace. And I would suggest using a ruler until you get familiar with where the headspace is typically on a jar. This one calls for a 1/2 inch headspace, and so that's just right above this, and I can put a little bit more in there. Then after you've filled your jar, you can run your non-metallic spatula around just to get rid of air bubbles, things like that. Then you want to make sure that your lid, your rim of your jar is clean with your towel so that if any of the stuff got on it, it's not going to interfere with the seal. Put your lid on there, screw the band on, just fingertip tight, not too loose, not too tight, and then set your jar in your simmering water. Your canner should already have simmering water in it. This is one of the reasons I like the rack that stays up here, is because I can just set the jars on there and then put them all down at once. If your rack sits at the bottom, go ahead and use the jar lifter to put them in as well as take them out. Okay, so finish filling your jars and setting them in your rack. And when it comes time when you're all finished, if you have a rack like this, you can set them all down in it. You have to make sure that the water is 1 inch above the top of the jars. And if it's not, go ahead and put some more water in it. You can use boiling water that you have ready or water from the tap. It might take longer for them to come to boil, so it's always nicer to have your boiling water ready. Then you put your lid on and keep it on high, and you don't start timing it until it's already at a boil. So you wait for it to come to a boil, then you start timing it from what the recipe says. This recipe is 10 minutes, so I would set my timer for 10 minutes. But I'd also lower the temperature so that it's not at a really hard boil. So on my electric stove, it's about 7 or 8. It stays at just a nice rolling boil. So you can't walk away from it. You have to kind of monitor it and make sure that it's boiling, but not so hard that your jars are knocking together. So just keep a monitor on it, and we'll see you when these are done. Okay, the timer went off. I have a towel-lined tray here. You can do them right on the counter if you want, but make sure there's a towel for them to sit on. You want to turn your heat off as soon as the temperature goes off and take the lid off. This is when you'll want to use your jar lifters, and you just take the jars out one at a time. Set them gently on your towel-lined surface. And then what you'll want to do is move, that's why I like to have them on a tray, that's a little tip, is I like to move them to a place in the kitchen where they're not going to get disturbed at all. So you want them to not move for 24 hours. And then after the 24 hours is up, you're going to check your jars and check the lids and make sure they're all sealed, and then you're going to label them and store them. We've eaten, especially pickled goods, we've eaten them 1.5 years, but it's always good to always put a date on your lids so that you know when that year is up and you can determine when you want to eat them. So in just about 45 minutes, we have pickled beans to enjoy throughout the year. And it's really easy to can. I hope you've learned that here. I have step-by-step instructions that you can read through on my blog, as well as recipes for this pickled beans and lots more easy, doable recipes for canning your produce that you either grow yourself or you buy.
Okay, so I thought that was a really good video. She does that in a little over 7 minutes, which I think is really good. She gave you a lot of information there, and she even gave you kind of some information on not just making jam, but doing the beans. So it's kind of an intro if you want to do vegetables. So I thought that was a really good sort of continuation of the first video. Gives you a little more information. And
I concur. The only difference there in that one was when Kathryn was talking about not using metal. So I think Kathryn's point on that one is because the metal can crack the jars. I don't know why she's objecting to metal, but I had
When
heard the
she was
same
talking,
thing before that.
you're not supposed to use metal, I don't think, when you're stirring the jars, perhaps, because, yeah, I'm not really
The
sure about that.
acidity?
That's the first time I've heard. Could be you could crack the jar, maybe?
Yeah, so I found that that was the one thing that stood out that was different from Kathryn's hands-on experience. So I think I'm going to go with Kathryn on that one.
You're talking about the ladle, or are you talking about the
No, she said, I'd have to go back and re-listen, but Kathryn said something about not using metal spoons. Well, I have to use a metal ladle unless I use a plastic one. And I do have plastic ones, but you're dealing with hot liquid. But if you're making a stew, you're still dealing with boiling hot stuff. So I don't see the difference.
Yeah, see, I've never heard the metal thing before. I've always used a metal ladle. I guess because, I mean, if you think about it, people have been using metal ladles forever making jam. So I don't know. That's something new to me. We'd have to look into that if that's a big deal. But I've always used metal ladles. And then, yeah, I don't know what to say about that one.
Yeah, right.
And
And I've got and I think that the new plastic ball, I'm pretty sure I have the ball brand of the wide mouth funnel. It's plastic. It's designed to withstand that heat.
yeah, and see, I always sterilize my jars. In addition to washing them, I always put them in the water for a few minutes, and then I right after I finish my jam, basically, I put them in the boiling water just for a couple minutes and let them just kind of sterilize a little bit, and then they from the heat they just pretty much dry out by the time I have to fill them. But the jars are warm, and that's what you want. You want to have the jars warm. So that's the way I've always done it. And then I have always put my lids in put the lids in just for a bit in the water with just use the tongs to put the water. But she's saying you don't even need to do that anymore. That's new to me. So
I think
I
she
guess
said she referred to as a FDA.
I've always just put them in the water for a minute or 30 seconds or something just to kind of sterilize them quickly.
Me too. Me too.
And then the other thing that she did, that the way I do it, as far as when you put them you put them on a tray or something in a box, and you put them and you leave them alone for 24 hours at least. And then the next day you unscrew the lids before you put them away, is what I've been taught to do, is to slightly loosen them. Okay, just ever so slightly. And then you check them the next day and see how they are, but you don't disturb them in the first 24 hours at least.
Right, and that's part of what I'm saying when you're planning ahead. All of a sudden, you have all these jars, and you've got them on your kitchen table, and then you realize you can't move them for 24 hours. And how are you going to sit at the kitchen table? So make sure you think ahead when you're doing this process, because there are things that you just have to do for it to seal. I have very limited counter space, so I didn't think about that in advance, Bella, when I was doing my first big round. And all of a sudden, I looked around and every space I had was covered with jars. And I'm going, oh my God, why didn't I think about that in advance? So just you learn by doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thought that you have to think about it. I typically leave mine. I have a big table in my kitchen that's like a big, restaurant table that's like bar height. And I have space that depending on how many I'm doing, I could leave, 24 jars there overnight and not disturb them because I have the space. But it's true, if you don't have the space, you need to be able to move them directly to where you're going to store them.
Okay, and then we have video number 3. Did I interrupt?
No, it's okay. So I'll just give a quick intro. So the third video is some information. Hold on. So this next video is sort of a controversial, I guess, thing about the lids and the do you leave the screw-on lids off or on? So some people traditionally leave them on while they're storing them, initially, or indefinitely even. Or there's people who believe that that's not a good idea. You should take the lid off and store them just with the lid portion and not the screw cap. So she does a little video, which is pretty short, kind of giving the pros and cons of each and why she's chosen one version. I thought it was good because there's some good information in there. I even learned something from this video. Typically, I have always stored mine with the caps on there, even though I check them to see that they, I always check to make sure they're sealed, of course, before I eat anything. So, but let's watch the video and then we can talk about it.
And you're meaning the rings, not the caps, right? The rings.
Rings are, well, I'm calling the cap the ring, and I guess I had to be careful. So the lid is what gets sealed, and then there's the twist cap or ring, I guess you call it. So the ring, whether or not to leave the ring on it.
There we go. Okay. All right, here we go.
Hi there. I wanted to talk to you about a safety issue with canning today, and it's a little bit controversial. Some people do it my way, some people don't do it my way. So first thing I want to say is there's no canning police. I'm just going to tell you my opinion and what I have learned and why I made the choice that I did, and then you make your own decisions. So that's my disclaimer. I want to talk to you today about canning rings. This is the ring for canning lid, and then this is either the flat or the lid, depending on what you call it. Do you store your jars with the canning ring on, or do you store your jars with the canning ring off? I store my jars with the canning ring off because these rings, they're reusable. You can use them as many times as you like, but they do tend to get old and they will start rusting. And it's more likely that they're going to rust, or they're going to rust more quickly if they have any liquid in here. And when you leave the ring on, even if you've dried it real well, there's bound to be just a little bit of liquid, under the edge here or in all the little grooves. And so it's just more likely that they're going to rust sooner. The other reason that, and this is a USDA recommended, or a USDA recommendation, that you store the rings off. And that reason is there is a possibility that you put the jar away in your cupboard with the ring on and it's sealed and it's fine. That seal breaks, okay? Maybe it's not even anything to do with the food, but for whatever reason that seal breaks. Well, when your ring is on, that's holding the lid on, and you don't know that it's not a good seal when you go to use it. There's also the possibility, according to the USDA, and I admit, I hear this and I think, really? Can that really happen? But they say that there is the possibility that that seal becomes unsealed and then you have heat changes or something like that, and then it actually reseals itself. So when you go to use it, you take the ring off, you think, okay, it's all sealed, it's good, so you pop that seal and you use it. But it's not really sterile inside because that seal was at one point broken and then it resealed itself. And the bad part about that is that the risk is botulism. That's the main risk because it's a very serious food poisoning. It has been known to be fatal, and so you really don't want to mess with it. If you do canning right, it's not hard. Just do it the right way, and then you don't have to worry about botulism. Now, I've heard people say that, oh, when you open the jar, if it smells good and you can see that it looks good and there's no mold or anything, then you're fine. Go ahead and use it. But the problem with that is botulism is something that you cannot see, you cannot smell, you can't taste it. You won't know it's there until you actually get sick. So, me personally, this is my reason. I don't store it with my ring on because I want to know that that lid is sealed because it's a good seal, not because the ring was artificially holding the lid on or anything like that. So many old timers store it with their rings. You have to make your own decision. My recommendation is take the rings off, store them away. Another good reason is then you don't have to have so many rings because you can reuse the same rings throughout the canning season just to process your jars And then you can just store these in a bucket or in a box or whatever you want. So my recommendation is take the rings off. You make your own decision. This is Sharon with simplycanning.com. You have a great day.
You want to go, sir, Mom?
No,
You want to
go ahead.
clarify? Okay, so I thought that was a great little video because, I mean, you can sort of do your own research and figure out which way. Now that she's done that video, I'm thinking I may change the way I do it. She's made some good reasons why it makes sense maybe to take the rings off as opposed to leaving them on. But, you know, each person can make their own decision about that. So we wanted to make a correction because we found some information. There was some confusion about the ladle thing and the metal. So the metal issue apparently only relates when you're doing pickling and using vinegar. That's when the metal ladle can become an issue. So so what I've learned is correct because I've never done pickling, so that would explain like why Kathryn was saying about the ladle because she's done a lot more pickling than I have. I've only done jams and chutneys and things like that, applesauce. So I've always used my metal ladle, and that's just fine for anything like that with fruit. So that's just to help people so they understand what's the deal with that.
And the one that I have about the no, this is, she shows the results of a seal not sealing. It's pretty gross. That one is 8 minutes and 20 seconds, so I'm going to grab that one for you. But I learned a lot from this one. She talks a lot, but she makes some good points. She talks like me. So one moment, please.
Hey guys, welcome to Appalachia's Homestead Pater with you. You know, opportunities present themselves in terms of being educational moments all the time on a farm and a farmstead, okay? Not all the time can you film them. Not all the time do you look like something that you would want to be on camera. So as I'm working, I've come back in and I am putting on chili for dinner. Okay, so I've got the ground beef already cooked, blah, 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 blah. And this is something, ironically, that has been brought up just this past week in my homesteading group on Facebook, okay? Love you guys in there, my gals and guys, okay? Guys and dolls, right? So we've been talking about canning. We've been talking about the safety of canning, items that should or should not be canned, and proper canning procedures. I want to talk about why it is important that you store your canned goods a particular way. If you caught the harvest rack video that I did for Gardener Supply, I kind of hit on that, okay? I'm going to show you what I'm talking about and why these safety rules, regulations, blah, blah, blah exist. I totally understand what Mamaw did 150 years ago or 100 years ago once canning came into really big fashion. But you know what? They did what they knew to do and they did what they could. There's a lot of things that we should do now because we are better educated on this particular subject, right? So let's use the common sense that God and Granny did give us. Let me show you what I'm talking about here, okay? Okay, so let me start with the good side of all of this, okay? So I've just grabbed a towel, and I mean, this is impromptu, but this is critical, people, okay? I'm taking the time away from my fencing in order to do this. You need to know. When you store your canned goods, I don't care if it's in your cellar, in your pantry, on the moon, under your bed, in your closet, in your underwear drawer. Listen to what I'm telling you, okay? Do not, first and foremost, leave the rings on. Now, a lot of folks will tell you that's because it will bust the seal, okay? Okay, well, maybe so. Leave it right there. Another big no is to take your jars, whether they have the ring on or not, hopefully they don't have the rings on, for crying out loud, and to stack them like this. That is a no, 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 no. Now, what some people do, listen to me, what some people do is they'll individually stack these items, and then they will put something even across the top, like a piece of cardboard, or maybe a piece of thin plyboard, or you know what's really good to do? You know those boxes that you get all these pretty little jars in, is to put them, once you've canned your item, put them back down into those ball canning jar boxes, those cardboard boxes, put them down in their individual little spaces, and then you can stack 2 to 3 boxes on top. Why? Because it leaves the space from the pressure hitting down onto your jars, which should not have the rings on. Capiche? Okay. Why? Some people, like I told you, will say, well, that's so you don't get the rust and the yuck and you bust the seal and all of that. Well, that is true. You don't want to bust the seal because you want to stay in the standards of safety, you know, what is safe and quality for, you know, your foods that you're going to be eating. Let me show you this. Do you see that? Do you? I know you do. Watch this. This has not been opened by me. Not. N-O-T. There you go. Here is why you do not stack your jars on top of each other. Number one, well, back up. You don't leave the ring on your jars, okay? Because if you have a false seal, and they happen because you didn't clean your jars properly, you didn't go through the proper cleaning, didn't go through the proper water or pressure bathing your items, you can very easily get a false seal. You can get a false seal even by doing all of these things. They happen, people. That means that the seal did not happen properly from the lid, the outer rim, to the jar, okay? Here's the point. If you keep the ring on and it keeps the pressure of that lid down, you may have gotten a false seal and you won't know it. Therefore, if botulism is forming inside your jar, it's a silent killer, if you will. It's not, okay, it can kill you. I mean, you can get really sick. So instead of it popping off and showing the funky town and the mold and the grossness that you need to visually see, it's going to start growing down into the jar. You won't know it because, see, you left your lid on with a ring and it kept that pressure down on it, and so it's going to grow down in there. Second to that, if you take your cute little blackberries like I've got here and you do the same thing and you're stacking and stacking, you're still putting that pressure down on top of the lid. The same idea as keeping the pressure down, keeping the seal down. And if you happen to have something like this forming, how in the dickens are you going to know? I want to see it. I want to know. Now, this is only the second jar of all the canning that I've done over the past 6 or 7 years that I have ever had do this, okay? I encourage you all the time to look at the proper and correct ways to can. I am sorry. I do not care if you're Mammo water bath green beans. I don't care if everybody flips stuff upside down. I understand all the things that can be done. And if you want to do that, that is your business. I do not advocate that here on my channel. I don't advocate that here at my home because you know why, guys? For 10 extra minutes, you're going to be spending a whole lot of time in the emergency room. Okay? Because you don't want to take the time to clean something a little bit extra, or to go buy an $18 water bath at Walmart, or to do all the things that you can do to ensure safety while you can. I'm just not going to advocate that, okay? So I want you to understand that, please understand that when you put your canned goods, whether it's in a harvest rack or whether it's in your pantry or wherever, I know I joked earlier about the underwear drawer, do not stack them on top of each other. Do not leave the rings on. Because if this is happening, if this grossness is happening secretly and in disguise in here, let it reveal itself. By not following these, you're just endangering you, your health, and your families. Not worth it. No way, no how. Hope you like this video. Hope it helps you out. I'm trying to just seize the moments when they count to help y'all. Guys, in the comments below, some of you gals especially out there that's been canning for years and years and years, I'm sure some of you will agree with some of this, some of you won't. But guys, we're trying to keep you safe. Okay, so some of you particularly that I know that's in my group that are big sticklers on canning safety, this is what we were talking about. Like and subscribe. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Wow, wow, wow. We'll talk to you soon.
I made when I heard that yesterday, the first thing I thought of was, oh my God, I'm going to have to go in and dump everything out that I made last year because now I don't know if everything's sealed.
I wouldn't worry about it too much. This is what I was taught. And now that I've heard your video and the one that I dropped, it's kind of making sense to me why I was taught what I was taught. So I was taught that after you've taken your jam and you've moved it to wherever it's going to be for the first 24 hours, you loosen the lids. You loosen the rings. That's what I was taught. You loosen them. So they're not applying any pressure and now that's assuming though, I think that they've popped already. You know how they pop and you get the dimple?
Right.
And so you'll know if your rings are loosened, then you're not going to have any false seal. The other thing that I was always taught that I'm meticulous about is I meticulously clean what's around the edge of the jars inside and out with a hot, wet paper towel. So I basically dip the paper towel in boiling water and then wipe the rim so that there's absolutely nothing that can interfere with the seal. And I've never ever had anything in all the times I've made jam. So I leave the rings on, but they're loosened.
Well, I'm really glad that we're having this discussion. Really glad. Because I've learned a lot, even from today, but just reviewing things this last few days, totally forgetting because I didn't realize 2 weeks have gone by so fast. But I was ironically looking at things yesterday and I was like, I didn't think of that. So I'm glad we had this conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, there's things I learned too. And there was one other thing that I think I was going to comment from her video. Is that you know that you've gotten a seal when you get the pop and you get the dimple. Now, sometimes you'll get the pops right away. It'll just go pop. You'll hear pop, pop, pop. And then other times, some of them will take longer. Like you won't hear a pop until the next day or 3 days later, you could be hearing the pop. So, but typically when I've done it, I'm happier when my pops come quickly because then I know that I'm confident that I've gotten a good seal. And then I am more confident I can loosen the rings and leave them alone until I'm ready to use them. And then if I have one that doesn't seal or I'm not confident that it popped and I have a correct seal on it, I just put that one in the fridge for me to eat and I'll eat it and it'll be fine. Because it's not going to be stored in the cupboard. It'll get refrigerated and it'll get eaten in a reasonable amount of time.
Now, the only other thing is that when you get done, that you're going to have all those rings. So plan ahead for a place to store your rings. And I try to keep my rings away from anything else, but I'm not always that diligent.
Well, you heard her say she reuses her rings, and I do too. And I'm thinking that maybe the reason that's another point that Kathryn was making about not reusing the ring or being very super meticulous about checking them, because when you're working with vinegar, the acid will cause damage and you end up with chipping or rust or whatever. So in that case, I see why you would be probably hard pressed to get too many uses out of your rings when you're making pickled vegetables or pickles or things like that. But when you're doing jam, my experience has been that I'm able to use my rings many times over.
Yes. And we use jars a lot here for, like, I pack my husband's lunches. So I probably should have a separate set that's just for my hubby's lunches, because those are getting used a lot. And so, yeah, thinking ahead a different way.
And I do the wax thing, and that's an old-fashioned thing. I'm just going to add that I've done that, and I do that, and I haven't had a problem with it. And I just handle it a little differently. Is that if I do use, because sometimes maybe I don't have enough jars of the professional canning to really can it, right? I don't have enough. And I've got more jam than I have jars. What I'll do is I'll make maybe 6 jars of, depending on what the recipe is, maybe I've got 6 jars I can fill that I'm actually going to can with the boiling water. And then I have a little bit of jam left. Okay. I will sterilize the jar just like I would the others, and I'll fill that up, and then I'll do the wax, which you basically just melt the wax. You put like a quarter to, well, it's probably more like a 3/8, at least a 3/8, a little bit better. This is basically the distance you leave for the other. You fill that with wax. And I found that works just fine. And those I would keep, those you could probably keep in a pantry for a limited period of time. I wouldn't keep them in a pantry for more than, for very long. And I'd probably more than likely just put them in my fridge. And if I want to give them to gifts, I say, here's one, I didn't can it. It's good if you keep it in your fridge and you eat it within a certain period of time. If it's going to be in the fridge, you don't have to worry about it. But it's a way that, if you're in a pinch and you don't have enough jars, I've done that for many years, and I've never had a problem.
Most excellent. Okay, and I'm going to finish it off with that easy grape juice recipe. 1 second. And I will drop a couple of still shots. What I can't remember right now is, did I have to water bath them? I don't think I did. So I'll make comments after we run this video. And it's 3 minutes, 59 seconds. It's a short one. Here we go.
Hi, this is Lisa from Rural and the Urban. And today we're going to make the easiest, most fastest Concord grape juice. Basically what I just did there, you're going to take Concord grapes, you're going to stem them, wash them, clean them, make sure there's no dehydrated one, petrified ones, no stems, no green ones, no nothing. You want them all ripe for this particular recipe. Okay, you're going to take a quart jar and you're going to put 1 cup of Concord grapes in there. Then what you're going to do next is you're going to add, let's see if we can get this on here without making a mess. You're going to add 1 cup of sugar to each one of these jars. So it's 1 to 1. Just go ahead and add it. Doesn't need to be pretty. So there we go. Then to these jars, let me just get this out of the way. Make sure you can see that jar. Perfect. You're going to take boiling hot water and you're going to add it to this jar. So I'm just going to go ahead and ladle this in. Make sure it's boiling hot water you're putting in here. Let's see. Need a bigger ladle, but work with what you got here. There we go. Alright. And you're going to fill it within, let me just check my notes here, I don't want to give you the wrong information. You're going to fill it like within a 1/2 inch of the top. Oops, so make sure there's enough in there. And what you're going to do next, take your handy dandy measuring device. Oops, about a 1/2 inch. Take your spatula end, just go around. I always give it a quick stir so the air bubbles get out and then the sugar isn't all settled on the bottom. Although once you process these, it'll be fine. Then what you do next, take a paper towel Go around the top like you would any other time. Oops, shut this down because that's boiling away. Take your lid lifter. You're going to make sure your lids are in some hot water. Just going to get these apart without burning my hands off as usual. There we go. Just going to pop the top on. Forgot my rings. Grab a ring here. Once again, be careful. That's going to be hot. You're going to tighten it finger tight. Okay, that's all there is to it. You're going to put this in a hot water bath. You're going to process it for 25 minutes. And it's instant grape juice. You got the skins in there. You got the seeds in there. All that is of benefit to your health. And I would let these sit for, I usually let them sit for a couple months before I break into them. Because I still have some left over from last year I need to finish up. So these taste a lot better if you let them sit. Do not try them right away. But I'll show you what they look like when we get done. And that's all there is to making this grape juice. It's fantastic. It works as a concentrate, but I'll show you when we get done. Okay, and here's the end result for the grape juice. And once again, I wouldn't drink these for like a few months. Give them a chance to the Concord grapes themselves to break down and the sugar to turn it into juice. What month is this? September. I probably wouldn't drink this probably till Christmas, just to give it a chance to do its thing. But this is the easiest grape juice I've ever made in my life, and definitely go ahead and give it a try. Thanks for watching.
I'm going to tell you what, it was the best darn grape juice I've ever had in my life. Now, it was a little on the sweet side. I don't know if you can reduce the amount of sugar to get the right, processing, but when I was sick over the winter, if I drank that, my stomach quit aching, or if I, remember I was going through that period of time where I was constantly throwing up. If I was able to keep down that grape juice, it stopped the nausea. That juice is amazing.
Purple grape juice is super healthy for you because of it's got the antioxidants in it. I wish I'd had that recipe. I could have canned, oh my God, I don't know how many jars from the grapes I had in Canada, they were basically a purple champagne grape from France. That's where the vine came from. They brought it back. The first settlers brought that vine over to the islands in Canada. And it was mixed with what they call a Foch grape, which is a northwestern Canadian, and I guess they have them also in the States, grape. And it was like totally disease resistant, and it had the most awesome flavor. And it made the best juice. And after a while, I didn't have anybody to make the juice. The guy that did it, he retired, and the other people who did juicing didn't want to mess with grapes. Only if you wanted to make wine, but it made the best juice. Oh my God, I could have made so many and I'd still be drinking it.
Well, I was thinking about your mulberries and things like that you have. Could you use the same recipe?
Oh, interesting. Yes, you could make mulberry wine or not wine, but mulberry juice. The thing about mulberries is you need some acid with it. So whenever I'm working with the mulberries, I have to have some acid. So if I make sorbet or whatever, I'm always adding like pineapple juice or pineapple or lemon juice. So yes, I could do that. That's a very good idea. I could make some juice with mulberry and maybe lemon. That would be good, or pineapple. Oh, very good.
Yum. Yep, and then I just tucked them away now. I left the rings on, so I don't know. She doesn't say to take the rings off, but I left mine on.
Can you DM me that recipe? Because you know what? I've got a bunch of mulberries in the freezer. I could try some. I've got tons that I make sorbet with, but I've got way too many. I'd like to try a batch of juice.
Yeah, it's really good. And I did different sizes. So like I did the size that's smaller. So I did a half a cup and a half a cup of sugar, half a cup of grape juice. Turned out the same, but I didn't have to open a whole big jar,
I like the quart size because then you just stick it in the fridge and you got like a couple drinks there. Yeah.
Well, I think that was a really good introduction. And, no matter how many times you do something, never hurts to go back and review. And boy, a lot of good pointers that came out today. But being organized, having your inventory, having the proper equipment, having the proper space, knowing how to store, and practicing safety along the way. Um, and when you're moving hot stuff, don't forget you got critters and kids running amok. So be prepared for that too.
And I was just going to give one more tip about books and information about where you might find some interesting books on canning. Is if you have a recycle depot for things like books and CDs, and some recycling centers like the one near me have an area where you can take in books, and you can take in records, you can take in CDs, things like that. A lot of times people find their old books from their grandmother, or some old great canning book from 40 years ago or something. You can find good stuff there in terms of recipes. That's one thing. And you can also probably find, sometimes you can find things like jars there.
Well, I really enjoyed that today. And, canning doesn't have to be just in the fall. I mean, it can be done any time of the year. So if you see a batch of an item that you really, really like, and you want to stock up on it, it's a good sale. You can always can in the summer and in the winter. And I actually like to can in the winter months because it brings heat and humidity on a cold, snowy day. So if nobody has anything else, I think we'll conclude for this week. And then we'll be back on the 27th. And I
Sounds
think
good.
Yeah, and we're still working on learning how to coordinate this with Kaylin and getting it recorded. And so Kaylin's going to drop, I believe, the descriptions and the links and stuff in the recorded side of things. And as we grow, then we'll start advertising a little bit more ahead of time. But we're just trying to work all the kinks out. Kathryn, what is that link again? Kathryn doesn't have her mic on. Let me open that real quick.
Yeah, Bernadine is that's the she's dropping a link for Bernadine recipes and stuff. That's my favorite a pectin to use because they have one for low
Yeah.
sugar where you can
Yeah.
control
And
it, and that's what I
exactly. Yeah.
and
Bernadine.
you go.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just gonna say real quick, that's what I think I mentioned the other day, that I had to search all over the place here. In Canada, it was easy for me to find it. But here I was looking everywhere, and unless it's seasonal, you can't find canning supplies that easy. Things like pectin, they don't carry it in the supermarket anymore. They don't carry it in the dime stores. You have to go places like Walmart, which I don't go to. But I ended up finding it in an Ace hardware store, a good one, in a sort of agricultural farming community. They had it.
Yeah, and what's nice with this particular site, there's products, so it's got jars and closures. It's got your pectins, your spice mixes, your accessories, publications, much like the other site that I dropped, the Bell one. I like the Bernadine better, but also on this particular, it's got the how-to guide as well. It does have useful links. It's got farmers markets, and their recipes section has a ton of different things in it, including how to make varying, you know, fruit butters and spicier butters, and just like there's such an array on there. Um, but you know, as Bella was saying, I mean, like their pectin products are really good because you get those that especially if you've got someone that needs to reduce sugars and so on, or is diabetic, and you want to really control the sugars in certain things so that they can enjoy small amounts of, say, jams chutneys, varying things like that. But they also, under the recipes, they have varying recipes for a lot of these, common things in that you like to can, that have reduced sugars, and how to do it, with how to can certain things with reduced sugars. Um, so the recipes are great to go through, which is why I dropped those 2 links.
Yeah, Bernadine is my preference. In fact, I only use that pectin. I really don't like using any other. I got so used to using it in Canada, and then I tried using other brands, and I still favor that one. And I think their recipes are good. I think they're easy to understand. And like you say, you have all that option with the sugars, and I don't use anything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've tried pectins and varying different things of other brands, and I've always gone back to the Bernadines. Theirs just happens to be like top notch. It's really good. So yeah, I'm with Bella on that.
Okay, and that concludes today's Gold Star Greenhouse. Thanks, Bella and Kathryn. You really helped me out today. Sativa, I missed you today, but thanks for giving us this place. Kaylin and Sid, you guys rock. And we'll join again. My cat just walked across the screen.
And she disappeared because the cat walked across the screen. So I think she's doing her next one. Will be Sunday, October 27th. So mark your calendars. Welcome back. The kitty booted you.
My cat just ran across my computer. Sorry about that. Am I here?
Cat's
Yes,
got a
ma'am, you are.
hinder.
Stinker. Anyway, we'll meet again. And yeah, you don't have to cut that part out, Kaylin. Okay, so we will meet again in 2 weeks from today, 3 o'clock Bella's time on the West Coast, 4 o'clock my time, 5 o'clock Kathryn's time, 6 o'clock for all those on the East Coast, and then 10 p.m. Sativa's time and the rest of the world. So we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks, guys.